Closed captions for this episode of Life in Wilkes is brought to you by Deal Insurance Agency in Wilkesboro, an award-winning, experienced, family-owned and operated agency with service and coverage that goes above and beyond expectations. Join us on a captivating journey as we explore the charm, history, and vibrant culture of Wilkes County. Discover the hidden gems, inspiring stories, and remarkable people that make Wilkes a place worth knowing and celebrating. Join us now and experience the unique essence of Life in Wilkes.
Well, having fun's not a difficult thing to do, is it, David?
Oh no. It's a permanent fixture in my life.
Well, welcome to Life in Wilkes. It's awfully good to see you.
Thank you, and good to see you again. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Well, I know who you are and what you do, but why don't you tell folks who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm the oldest side of what's left of a guy that was born here in Wilkes in 1954, and I had the fortune or misfortune, depending on how your perspective is, to be born into two families of musicians. And so my early years were spent either at the home of one set of grandparents and my folks, who some of them played live radio in the 40s. And they were hillbilly musicians and early bluegrass musicians of the day. And then my other side of the family, my mom's folks over in the Hayes community, some of them were radio musicians in the 40s, and that's how those two families got together. They were winding up at the same radio station, my dad and mom, as young folks, and that's how they married. So when I was growing up, I was exposed to music all the time. It was string music for the most part, plus church music with the old hymns. And I grew up in this mindset, and I thought, till you went to school, I thought everybody played. I mean, you were supposed to do that, you know. Right. But so anyway.
So the David Johnson side, the Johnson side of the family were musicians. And who were the other side of the family?
Okay. The Caudles. And they were both sides of the family represented 2 or 3 different bands that played on the newly formed WKBC radio in the late 40s, and also the station that was here for a while, WILX, down next to where the VFW is housed now.
Wow. They're not around anymore.
They're not. They didn't last all that long, but it was really interesting because when the VFW was built in the 50s, the very lot that the VFW sits on was where WILX was. I think we found the part of the foundations of it out there that's still there. And the musicians that played there, one bunch being from Mount Pleasant called the Church Brothers, which became a well-known early-day bluegrass band, and people overseas have archived their work.
Because they were not popular just here.
No, they were popular. Right. And interestingly, they were popular not only away from here, but years after some of them had passed on. But Ward Eller was one of those, and he lasted for nearly a century. And he played in a house band that pretty much ruled the roost in square dances and regional music down there at that VFW from the mid-50s until not that many years ago.
Yeah. You know, that's quite amazing, because Ward Eller, I've heard Ken Welburn talk about him quite a few times in glowing terms, but spoke about, just how much people loved him.
A wonderful man.
And let me ask you that question about music, because you've been doing it now. You're 70 now, so I've
been doing it professionally since 1969.
So that's a long time.
Yeah, boy.
So you've seen the power of music, though, right?
Yes,
you've
sir.
seen the power of music to have a positive impact on people and do something to the memory, because it's like when it gets there, it sticks and stays, right?
Oh, it does. I mean, there are people, I have seen people, my wife and my son and I used to do a little ministry with some of the rest homes. I've seen people that were stricken with Alzheimer's, that were stricken with strokes, that couldn't speak anymore, but they could still hum tunes. And we would play songs, and they would almost come out of their shell. Right. With knowing some of these songs, particularly old hymns and stuff.
Part of their memory that's the last to go.
Yeah, the music stays with them.
Right.
It does. It's a huge communication tool. I've often wondered if we came across some extraterrestrial intelligence sometime, if we had no words that we could share in a language, if we could just hum a couple of tunes and see what we had in common, we might do all right,
I kind of think things might work out fine.
It couldn't hurt.
Yeah, there you go.
But I grew up hearing it and listening to it, and I wanted to do it. You try to emulate your folks sometimes. Mm-hmm. My dad was a wonderful player. He was a guitar player, a fiddler, a mandolin player. He was an MC. He knew how to conduct himself with the crowd, and he learned those things from being, I guess, on the radio. But even in the military, I've got pictures of him playing in his Army fatigues with other musicians from North Carolina, by the way, that they were stationed with in Killeen, Texas. And it was around me all the time, so I wanted to do it. And I did what other folks did when they were growing up. I played ball and went to school and did all these things, but I wanted to play. And so...
What was it? What was it about the playing? I just wanted to talk about that for a moment, David, because I think you've described it, but I think it's worth talking about in a little more breadth if we can. And that is what music actually does to you. So when you talk about the early radio days, I mean, it set the stage. And it's pretty darn exciting today. It was all live.
Well, it was.
And literally, it set the tone for what people at home were hearing, set a mood, told a story, and it was addictive.
It was addictive, and it became, these are days pre-television.
Right.
For the most part. And the people that were playing, they talked to you. They were, as you say, they were live. They became part of your daily routine. They became part of your family. Arthur Smith figured this out early on.
Oh, sure.
And he said, we realized that we were in people's homes during the breakfast hour. And the farming communities, Wilkes County, I mean, and rightfully needing to be, was an agricultural society for the most part. And the farmers would come in for lunch, and the family would be around the table, and they'd flip on an old radio, and the radio broadcasts would have live players that were on every day, either at 12 or 12:15 or 12:30 when folks were going to be eating. Well, that became part of your relaxation. And it became soap operas before there were soap operas.
Sure.
People got addicted to it. They liked it. And then I've seen Arthur more than one time take time to give the temperature. Or have you heard about this news story? He was not a newscaster,
sure,
but they would discuss things, and you were drawn into that. And the music was the great big backdrop for that.
That's right.
It was the theme song. It set the thing up.
The sound effects, too, right?
Everything. Even the comedy routines that the players did. Tommy Fail and Ralph Smith back in the 60s would do the counselors of the airwaves and all that. So it drew you into it, and it was a performance, but it was sometimes it was something that was a good pill.
Are you mindful of the fact that what we're talking about now, what your family was involved with, and these experiences you're talking about, Arthur Smith, and I had the honor to meet him and visit with him in the last couple of years of his life at Studio East in Charlotte.
I did a mini-session for him there.
And it was amazing because I had seen some of those early shows. I remembered Fred Kirby, as a kid.
Fred was my hero.
And there we are, at Studio East, and it's history. It's America. It's human history.
It is. It affected a lot of people.
Yeah.
He had that kind of distribution, and you can't hardly go anywhere, particularly in the southeastern United States, if you talk to somebody over 50 or 60, they've heard the name, and many of them know intimately some of the stuff he was involved with.
Isn't it amazing that we've been alive during some very important parts of human evolution?
I can't think of a time in terms of history that it would have been any more exciting to be a part, particularly even of Wilkes County in North Carolina,
Yes.
than the 50s through now. I mean, we've seen some stuff, and not all of it was nice, but we've seen some amazing things come down.
Man landed on the moon.
Yes.
Wow.
I remember sitting with a tape recorder, taping Walter Cronkite, talking about that.
Right.
And it was the only thing, space launches were the only things that my mother would let me stay home from school to see. She let me stay home when I was 7 to see John Glenn be launched into orbit.
Everyone knew it was a big deal, right?
It was huge. And we were in a race, and we wanted to win it for many reasons. But I was just interested in the science of it.
Has music helped you in that way? I have a lot of music friends who say that music opened your mind up to a much broader way of thinking.
It does a lot of things like that, and I noticed early on, because I taught music for 11 years, I noticed a correlation with a lot of young people in mathematics. I got to where I would ask them how their math scores were in school, because there was something about playing, and music is mathematical in itself.
Sure.
You have to count beats, whether you're conscious of it or writing it down or just doing it in your head. You have to be aware of intervals of things and how many, to tune something up, you're listening to so many beats per second and stuff. And I was amazed at how many of them that had good math scores tended to make good musicians. But then the artistic ones like me that didn't care that much for math, I would sit, in advanced biology class in high school and draw pictures of guitars. It's amazing how I got out of school.
That was your interpretation of math, right?
Yeah, and I noticed that they also made good players. So it seemed to transcend all types of knowledge, but there was some correlation too.
So you had musicians that at an early age who could actually write music, but some didn't, and they were incredible musicians.
Incredible. It came from in here.
Right.
There was something in there that clicked, and they could express it, but it had to be through the musical idiom. It was that was the way they talked.
So music, as we were talking about and breaking down the power of it, it's more than a feel. I mean, the feeling is the tangible thing, right? We sit and we listen. It's either going to relax us, it's going to put us in a certain mood.
It's cathartic.
It does all of these things for us. We were talking before we rolled today about the evolution of technology and AI technology, and you can pretty much go in and have a computer do amazing things now.
Right.
But it's still not you doing it, right?
There's a difference.
Right.
There's a difference. You can take all of your feelings and wrap them up into one ball, and that's still not going to contain your reaction on any given day, because human beings are volatile things.
Right.
And there's a lot of things in around us that affect us in our decision making, what curve we're going to turn to that day, what note we're going to play. I get paid in recording sessions, which has been my line of work for over 50 years. I get paid to be spontaneous. Now, they lay sheet music in front of you, and we have to play what the producer says, but constantly we're given leeway. Interpret this over here some way.
Right.
We'll lay the foundation now. You fill in the blank with what you're feeling. And if you feel what the artist wants you to feel,
right.
something that pleases him and whoever's writing the check, then you'll get called back for another session.
You've been doing this for long enough. So what's your average? So your average of thumbs up, that's great, David, that's a wrap, or you got to keep on working it over?
It's probably, I've been lucky. I have worked with folks that I knew, and I've always had to meet new people. But the return customers are great, because if you did something they wanted you to do, they'll call you again.
Right.
It's probably been 70-30, 70 to the positive side.
That's good.
They're not going to call me to come be in a symphony because I'm not a good enough reader for symphony music. I read Nashville number system. I'm a country player, bluegrass player, western swing, gospel, tremendous amount of southern gospel cut in this area. And those have been our bread and butter sessions. So that's the people that call me, and they usually call you from what you've done before.
Right.
So they know what I'm capable of. They know my strengths, my weaknesses.
They know your sound. You know what you can do.
They do, and they want something they've heard before for the most time.
Right.
And if it's creative, they know to call people that don't mind to do it 15 times if that's what it takes,
So as you do session work, is most of that, if you look historically, I imagine over the years it's evolved, but you would travel to Nashville and go to...
I travel to Nashville some. I am still at 70. I am pretty much I'm non-union. I've never done the union AFM in Nashville because my work was not predominantly there.
Okay.
Arthur had me in the union in Charlotte for a little while when I was doing television work in the late 60s and early 70s. I had to be union for that. But our work has been mostly off the card. There's probably 50 or less of us that do this east of Nashville. And I wanted to live in Wilkes. I had a piece of land here that my grandfather had given me, and I wanted to live here. So my traveling has been North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, some down in Georgia, and as far north as Huntington, West Virginia. And that's kind of the route that I've spent literally for the last 50 years. And I've worn out a many of a van, a whole bunch of Ford Aerostar vans over the years.
What do you love most about being home in Wilkes?
I feel attached here. My family's been on the same piece of land for 7 generations.
Wow.
The music that I grew up with is still predominant here. There is a patch of land that's Wilkes County and the 8 counties that surround it, and I will swear to this day, this is something that God touched some way and said, I want some musicians in this place. And I started a book that I've not finished yet talking about that in 2017 called Bottomland. And it is literally a garden of players here. I've been in all the places I've recorded. If there's one thing that people have told me, it has been that you're so lucky to have access to all these musicians. It's not that way back where we come from. And some of these folks are from Texas and California. And it's like if you took a section of players out of New York and L.A. and Chicago, where all the great studios were, and you salted down some of those musicians in a little rural area here.
That's what
what we live in, and it's what we've always lived in. And I think the Indians knew this because in Wilkes, right where the town is, before there was ever a North Wilkesboro, before Wilkesboro was ever streets laid out by Mr. Lenore and all those folks, the Indians were having their yearly harvest celebration. And most of them were Cherokee. Right here on the banks of the Yadkin, and this is where they whooped it up, and they had the music, and they had the shindigs, and they celebrated a good harvest.
So you're contending that good music, the spirit of music, the inspiration of music, is inherently here.
I think the Lord put it here.
Yeah. Wow. That's
because
fantastic.
I believe in Him, and I believe in His Son, and I think that there are just certain places that He blessed with this, and this is one of them.
I hear about you playing up in your little church in the country, and people coming from near and far to be part of that experience. I stopped for breakfast down in Rock Creek there's a little restaurant beside the IGA store, and I went in, and there's this fella who was sitting there having breakfast, and I'd come in. I just had cataract surgery done, so I couldn't see a darn thing. And
been there and done that.
so he's just talking away, chatting up like we've known each other forever, and that happens a lot, when you're on television. But it was interesting because he said, "Carly, have you been up to see David children's play yet?" And I said, "No, but I need to. A lot of invitations." And next thing I know, he was dialing somebody at the church. This lady, she'd be kind of the organizer. You would know who it would be.
It could have been any one of 5.
Yeah. Well, she was on the phone.
Yeah, okay.
And it's like, well, Carl says he'd be open to coming up. Maybe he could do a story.
Yeah, right.
Like, well, I want to get David in the studio so we can talk, and then we'll do both of them.
You need to see it sometime. It's it is Bottomland personified.
Right. The fact that people talk about it, and I don't think that fellow went to that. He was a member of your church there, but he knew. Ken Weber's told me about it several times.
Right. We have a lot of folks from other churches that come there. We have pastors from other churches that come there. For this thing.
So it's the music, but it's just the spirit of it all, right?
It is, and with the pastor that we have now, Pastor Susie, she was a musician up in New York.
Oh.
And she came here. She said, I was appointed in Winston-Salem and Asheville, and she said, I looked at this area in Wilkes, and she said, I told my husband, that wouldn't be a bad place to live. And she's got enough years on her now. She's wanting to retire. And she said, let's find a house there. And she said, because her appointment was coming here in the Methodist Church, and they bought a house in Wilkesboro. And she said, I want to live here when we retire. And she's a musician. She's a guitarist and a singer and a writer. And she said there was something about this place that just seemed right. And I said, well, you came to the right church. I said, we like to eat and we like to play music and worship the Lord,
Right,
So,
right. So it all worked out.
Yeah, it worked out pretty good.
Isn't it good? Doesn't it feel good when you're just doing what you're supposed to be doing?
I've never thought about another living. I was talking to the tech over here about the cameras and stuff. I would have enjoyed film work, I think, some other things. But I wanted to be a science teacher for a year or two when I was in elementary school. I thought, I'd like to do that because I like scientific things. But I knew from the first recording session that I did, and the first shows I played with my dad when I was 10. We did public performance from the time 1964 on. I knew that was going to be the biggest part of my life. I just knew it was. And I have gotten physically tired in 70 years, and things don't work as well as the joints and stuff don't work as well as they used to. But I have never gotten tired of the work. Every day is different. Every session is different. Every show is different. And it's addictive. And when you can get out of bed and you look forward to what you are obligated to do, because of what you've decided to do for a living, you're a lucky, blessed person.
Oh, I agree with that entirely. Do you feel like because of your love for music, is there a bit of adrenaline rush that comes with it?
Oh, it's incredible.
Right.
You can be in the middle of, the stage is adrenaline from 30 minutes before till you're coming down after, as a rule. Right. But recording sessions are that way. And, you're split up because of separation of sound and stuff. You're split up. Sometimes I spend an entire day in a booth. I can see guys through windows, but we're talking to each other through the headphones and communicating with the control booth. But we're tied together here and in the heart with what we're doing. And when the groove is feeling good and the song is a great song and the artist is excited about it and all the players are on the same page with this thing and you're in the middle of the cut, sometimes things happen that transcend the mechanical process and it just lifts that thing a little bit. We did a song with the great Southern Gospel group, legendary group, the McCameys, one time. And we were just going to run over it and practice it. And so we had the chord charts in front of us, and my friend Roger Fortner was over here playing the bass fiddle, and the drummer was in the booth next to me, and we got into this thing, and I said, all right, this is not a hard chart. Everybody, let's just run it down like we're going to do it. And we did the rundown. We cut that song 2 or 3 times after the rundown. We kept the rundown. And it was a #1 chart gospel song. Long time it stayed on the charts. And the Lord blessed the song because of the message in it. But that track had something that nothing else, it happened one time. It happens one time. And a lot of times when you're playing a solo or you're playing just a little fill between words, just 3 or 4 notes, those 3 or 4 notes, something works with them. And you better keep that.
Right.
That's that.
Did you know in that particular situation, did you know when you cut on the one that had the energy, did you know that was the one?
I remember that session and I remember that cut. I was excited about that cut. I thought, gosh, I don't know that we're going to improve on that.
Right. And you didn't.
We didn't. I mean, those other cuts probably exist in an archive somewhere, unreleased stuff. But I think we knew that was pretty good. That was what it needed to be. Now, I have done stuff. I remember we were in the middle of there was a period of time that a lot of my friends and I were playing Southern gospel sessions so hefty and scheduled that we were doing a slow week was 30 songs, a medium week was 40, and a heavy week was 50. And we have done some 60-song weeks. You're averaging 10 songs a day, and buddy, we were trying to play them tight, but we were popping those things out. And in South Carolina, I remember a weekend that we did. I think it was 40 tunes that weekend, and we were recording at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And there was one song right in the middle of all those songs that was just another song, but it became the #2 song for the year in 1988. It was called I Found My Lily of the Valley. Quentin Mills released it, and we were working for Quentin. I didn't know then. I was just trying to maintain and play good music. Sure. Sometimes it happens and you don't know, but a lot of times it does. You feel it. Yeah, and nice. If you feel it, the listener's going to feel it.
And that feeling's what's kept you going.
Oh, yeah.
And here you sit, and while things may not be as comfortable moving as they once were, once you get playing, you play through the pain, right?
But you do, and I've been lucky. I had a orthopedic doctor for a while that was really good with silicone injections, or cortisone. That's what it was.
Right.
And he helped me through some times. There was a year I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue working.
Right.
And he really helped me out, and he was a guitar player, so that really helped.
Okay.
He knew what the score was.
Yeah.
But he saved me from surgery, and now I've done your thing. I've had cataract surgery in both eyes, and still have to have those to read chord charts and stuff. Right. But that's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it didn't stop Doc Watson, and he didn't need any of that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think people talked about observing Doc Watson and the unique energy that he brought to it.
He would lift you just playing with him. That's the thing about music that's so contagious. It's the spirit that the folks next to you have, and you catch it. Tony Rice, wonderful guitar player. Playing with Tony, my cousin Eric Ellis, who's a wonderful banjo player, we go to church together. Eric and I have talked about it because both of us used to play with Rice some. We'd fill in with him when he had a player out or something. Tony would, when you started playing with him, if he was just playing rhythm guitar, you felt this energy from him that you didn't always feel sometimes.
Right.
And it'd crank you up, and it made you do things better than you could do them,
So as long as somebody's doing something excellent, it can raise the whole group.
It's contagious. What do the ball players say? Hitting's contagious.
That's right.
You get those. I used to watch Atlanta play ball, and when one of them started knocking them over the fence, buddy, pretty soon it was just a merry-go-round.
That's right. Well, we were going. You talked about getting together. We're together now, but quite specifically, our mutual friend and organizer, Vivian Hopkins, helped facilitate today's schedule. And you're working with her on a project with something that involved her father, which is another musician that was well known in Wilkes.
He figures prominently in the text of the book I'm working on, Ralph Pennington. Ralph was a stalwart side man. His job was kind of like my work. You play with other people. You fill in the cracks for them. He was a bass player. He was a banjo player. He was a fiddler, a mandolin player, an instrument builder. Every aspect of music he was into, even while he was raising his family, a harmony singer. And Ralph was a writer. He wrote tremendous amounts of songs. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge mystique that has come up about one or two songs that he wrote that we're pretty sure he gave away, that other folks recorded.
To a very well-known group.
I write about that in the book, too, because it bears repeating. But anyway, Ralph wrote a lot of songs. Some of these were unreleased. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them, the Church Brothers in Mount Pleasant recorded, and they wound up being on the record label that was here in Wilkes, Blue Ridge Records, that was housed here in Wilkes for a time.
How long were they in
I
operation?
think they were actually a business from around 1950 or 51 to about 58. But those records are legendary now. People are seeking them out. There were 78s, most of them, 78 RPM records, and they became collector's items. But Ralph wrote a lot of songs that wound up being on their projects, and wrote stuff for the Stanley Brothers recorded, out of Virginia recorded his stuff. He wrote some stuff that Flatt and Scruggs recorded. And Vivian has taken some of these songs, plus a new one that nobody's ever heard, and she's doing a compilation recording, and there's all kinds of players on this thing. She's brought in friends, and we're still cutting tracks for it. She's got most of it down, but we've been doing most of the production in Asheville at the shop studio up there with Van Atkins. And Van is has a career of cutting good bluegrass music. He worked for Doyle Lawson, all these people. So she's got good production values going on it, and it's going to be an exciting project when it's done. But Ralph was the impetus behind that, her father.
And so it's yet another story that ties to the creative genius that's come from Wilkes County.
Yeah, and you know, Ralph was one of my heroes because I met him as an older fella. And Ralph had a handicap that he had to transcend. He took off most of the fingers of one hand, this one right here, his noting hand, in an accident with a bandsaw, making a bass fiddle bridge of all things. You know, he's working on an instrument and cut part of his fingers off. While he was still in bandages, he was playing bass fiddle and getting back into the groove. And I saw the man play fiddle and mandolin and stood on stage with him as a kid playing some things, and him playing with those fingers shortened up, and he still did a wonderful job. Just tear a banjo up, you know, or a fiddle, either one.
Wow.
It's great stuff.
I think when we look at our musician icons or heroes, there's always a little something that had to be overcome. And that makes it a little richer, I think.
And, you know, sometimes those things are not visible. Some of the things you have to overcome are inside. Musicians are human beings. Musicians and human beings of all stripes have to overcome fears. One of the greatest guys on stage I ever knew was Tommy Fail. Tommy Fail he just looked like he was born on stage. He could hold a crowd like that. That's why Arthur Smith kept him so long. And Tommy told me, he said, when I started, and he said even years after I was singing professionally, he said I was scared to death. He said I would literally get nauseous at the thought of going on stage. And he said one night I just said, okay, I want to do this so bad. I'm going to stand right here. And if I pass out and die, okay, then I die. And he said, now that's the way my mind was working. And he said, when I got past that, he said, it left me, and he said I've been able to function ever since.
Must have been that song about the Brown Mountain Lights that.
I still sing his song. That song scared me so bad. Now you talked about music and working on your mind and your heart.
Right.
That song came out in the early '60s, around '61 or '62. That version of it.
Right.
And Arthur, it was cut down there at Arthur's in the old studio, back before there was a Studio East.
Right.
And Tommy did that song, and they did it on TV, and they had this little set made up. It was a cardboard mountain. They didn't have much of a budget for sets, and they had this cardboard mountain. And he said one of the stagehands was back there with a flashlight, and Tommy would sing in front of this mountain, and the guy would run that flashlight around the top of that mountain. Well, I'd watch that,
Right.
and my grandmother got me that record. And I had a little record player, and I'd play it. And when I heard that song, I wouldn't go outside by myself after dark for about a month. I didn't know what kind of boogers were out there, but I didn't want no part of it. But I loved that song.
Yeah.
And he sang it live. He came. Arthur Smith brought his whole crew, and they had those things called talent hunts then. And they came to Union Elementary School. And Tommy, the first song he did on stage was he popped out there with that big F-hole guitar and started playing Brown Mountain Light, man, and I just about keeled over. I wanted to be a part of that.
Right.
I wanted to wear the clothes. I wanted to play the instruments. I wanted to play them all.
So you saw that as a kid. You envision yourself doing that.
Oh, I wanted to do it. I would take, I was lucky in some ways. I mean, I was an only child, and I had a whole lot of surrogate parents, along with my mom and dad. Excuse me, my mom and dad. But I would take stuffed animals. Sometimes, your granny's going to buy you a big stuffed rabbit or something.
Right.
Well, I had all these stuffed animals sitting around. And I got to see Flat and Scruggs when I was 6 years old. They were here at the National Guard Armory. As a matter of fact, my kinfolk helped book them in here. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to be a part of that. And I was already playing a little guitar. But I would take stuffed animals and set them up in the end of a room. And I would take little toy guitars, and I would arrange these bands. And I'd put a record on and play it. And I'd put this guy over here, this rabbit holding this guitar and this stuff, and try to organize that band till it looked right on stage. I didn't know what I was doing, but I kind of figured it out about 20 years later when I was managing a band, and I was telling you need to work over here. This is what you need to do. And
did you ever have a step back in time as you're directing your group and say, "Rabbit, do"?
I've had some. I'll tell you what. I've played with some guys that thought they were rabbits. I think I have. That's gone through my mind ever since, because I didn't know at the time what it meant. I visualized playing multiple violin parts, and I was an only child, and I kept wishing, oh man, if I had 4 or 5 brothers, and I could do 3 violins, and I could do a mandolin pass here, and we could all do it together, and we could work out these parts. And that was when I was 10 or 12 years old. I was already thinking about multi-track recording before I ever knew what multi-track was, where I could literally play all the parts.
Do that yourself, right?
And that's been a lot of my work, because people hire me to do, over the years, I've done string quartets for them, with a viola and a cello and 2 violins. Don't have to hire anybody else. I can just go in and arrange the part and play it. I like playing with other people, but sometimes if you do a session and they're only going to hire one, bring what you got,
Right.
And you can play we got all these tracks you can fill up,
Oh, David, that's great. I can just see it now. David's sitting there. He's played the fiddle, and he says, "Okay, Rabbit, you're done." And then, Squirrel, you come up. And then David gets the guitar. But isn't there a bit of playful mischief that goes along in creating things?
Yeah. And let me tell you, when you grow up like we grew up in the 60s, watching Saturday morning cartoons, all of those cartoons have soundtracks.
That's right.
And those were orchestras doing those soundtracks. And sometimes you'll see a cat sneaking up on a mouse, and you'll hear a single violin line,
right.
or you'll hear the big dog coming down the street, and you'll hear some bass fiddle.
Right.
The Jaws. Those two notes in Jaws that were just the bottom end of the orchestra. You think that way when you're doing sessions because you're relating, particularly if you're working on a vocal and somebody's singing and you're adding notes to their vocal performance. You think, what can I fit in here? I don't want to get in the way of the vocal, but I want to describe musically what the vocal's doing.
And you were thinking this way even as a kid?
You do, because we were raised in an environment where music accompanied everything we saw.
So it was just part of who you were.
It becomes part of who you are, I think.
If it's true, this idea that as a child, when we're first born, there's some studies years ago that came out and said we obtain about 50% of our adult intelligence by the time we're like 2 or 3 years. I mean, really young. And it had to be those instincts, those things that are the environment that's what you're absorbing,
environment.
Right? And yours was music.
It was. Now, I think part of that, and I'm not enough of a scientist to know this, I think part of it can be born in a person. I think some of the genes may be more predisposed to this or that, but environment, I'm convinced that environment was 90% of mine. Because I heard it all the time.
Right, it was just there.
And when I realized, and I'll tell you where I first realized this, was watching Captain Kangaroo.
Yeah.
Because everything about that show was like every other television show. It was scored with music. Well, if you remember the character, Mr. Green Jeans, one of the things he did, he would bring at least once or twice a week a new musical instrument out there. Humpy, I can't remember his last name. Hugh, I believe was his name. But anyway, he was a musician, and he played all these things, and he could play them pretty well, and he would bring a trombone or a bass fiddle or a ukulele or something. But even the theme song to the thing, you had that stuck in your mind. And when you heard that, as you said, playful thing a while ago, that's the theme to the Treasure House. I go do school shows every now and then, particularly like on career day or something, where I'm talking to middle schoolers most of the time. And here are 12 and 13-year-olds that weren't born that long ago.
Right.
And so I'll play 3 notes of the Andy Griffith theme. Da-da-da-da, and I don't even get 2 bars into it. What is that? And most of them know it, but they know it from syndication because it's been playing ever since it started in 1960. But they know that song, and even if they've never seen the show, it rings a bell with them because somebody in their family used to watch this show that's stuck back there.
Right.
Almost as many of them know the sound of the Beverly Hillbillies theme. Right. As soon as you start playing that banjo line that Scruggs did.
Same thing, right?
Environment.
That was on years ago when it came out, and it's never stopped being played.
It's never stopped being played, and generations have heard it. There are shows that kids know simply from the music. They know more about the music inside, I guess, than they know about the plots of the shows.
Can you imagine, David, life without music?
No, I couldn't. I think I asked myself one time, I was looking at Doc. Doc was a friend, and Doc periodically had come to my house, and I would go and we would play every now and then together through our mutual relationship with Bill Young, the banker musician here in town. And I looked at Doc's situation, and he seemed so satisfied with his music, and he just knew no restraint in things he would do without sight. And I kept thinking, gosh, if I was blind, But then I got to thinking, wow, what if I was deaf? I don't know what I would do. I'd really hate to lose my hearing. I almost think I could do without the sight easier than the hearing because of the music. But Beethoven proved one thing to us. He went deaf.
That's
and
right.
still wrote monstrous scores.
Right.
Because the music was in here. And I think the Lord puts that in there. For whatever reason. Now, whatever we do with it is on our slate. But I think he gives us those abilities. I think he gives us that impetus to play, to express ourselves in music. I mean, if you look at Scripture, when John saw into heaven in Revelation, the first thing he heard was praises and worship music. And David was a harpist.
Right.
One of the Psalms says, praise the Lord on an instrument with 10 strings. They had 200 or 300 designated musicians when Israel was a forming nation. This was their job. Right. So it was important to even get into that culture.
Very important. I mean, when we look back thousands of years at ancient philosophies and ideas, and those ideas are transcended now into the idea of meditation and prayer. And there's always a sound.
There's a sound.
There's a sound that invokes a feeling.
And look at the script for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That whole scenario is built around 5 or 6 notes.
Right.
I don't think that's an accident. I think the screenwriter might have got it from somebody else, but I think that's always been there.
Right. I think you're right, and I think having all these diverse encounters are just what make us happy sitting here talking now.
Doesn't it? But back in the day when my great-grandfather was playing, he was a fiddler over on where Highway 18 is now, Noel Johnson. I never knew Noel, but he played square dances. And, excuse me, he was a square dance fiddler. He would play. That was what he was known for. And I'm sure he did other things in life, but he became typecast as a fiddler. Well, let's have a square dance. Well, we'll need some music. Well, let's call Noel Johnson. He'll do that. And my identity has always been wrapped around that, and I've never shunned it because I was happy with that. I don't mind people saying, we need some music, let's call Dave.
There is something rather practical about knowing our lane and staying in it, isn't there?
Well, I knew for sure, and I used to love to go to the Wilkes County Airport and watch airplanes take off and land.
Right.
When I was 4 or 5 years old,
Sure.
I'd sit there and watch those planes.
Right.
I didn't want to fly in one. And I have every reason not to want to fly in one.
Right.
Every time I hear about one crashing, as a matter of fact, I just lost some musical friends the other day, the Nealons, in a plane crash. But I knew, as much as I liked to watch them, that was not going to be my line. I carried brick from my grandpa. He was a builder as well as a banjo player. And when I was 13, I spent my summers carrying brick for him. And it felt good when you're 13, you're strong, and I can carry those 22 brick and those tongs and go right up that ladder with them. But that wasn't going to be it. My dad was a career glass inspector at Carolina Mirror, and I worked down there a summer, and I said, yeah, that's great. This is pretty good. That's all right. When are we going to the show, so we can play?
Right.
And I got the science teacher thing out of my mind. I played one recording session, and it was tied to Wilkes because it was
What was it?
soundtrack. Holly Farms had hired Les Blank out of Hollywood, California. He produced short films. Much like you, he did human interest stuff. And Les was hired to do a history of Holly Farms. This thing still exists, and this was in '69.
Was Gerald Langford there then?
Probably. And I was 15, so I can't remember who was there and who wasn't. I'm trying to remember who our liaison was that got all this together. I can see his face, and I can't remember his name. But we went to a studio. I'd never been to a studio before. I'd been playing for money for years, but as a square dance player. But we went to a studio in Taylorsville. A young fellow named Harry Deal had just built a studio over there with equipment that he bought from Arthur Smith in Charlotte when Arthur refurbished his new studio that was going up at Studio East. That's how related this stuff is. So Harry he had a band called Harry Deal and the Galaxies, a very popular regional top 40 band, and he built this studio. So that's where we went to do the soundtrack. Les Blank wanted to hire regional musicians to do Wilkes County-oriented music that would have been popular maybe in the 30s and 40s and 50s when Holly was really developing. And he hired my dad, Doc Walsh's son. Doc was from Wilkes County, and he was on a major label in the 20s on Victor and Columbia. Right. He hired Doc Walsh's son, Drake, who was a fiddler here in Wilkes, and Marshall Craven, who owned the first active recording studio in Wilkes County that was of any note, played bass, and I played banjo. And they hired us to do 18 old bluegrass songs, public domain bluegrass songs, for the soundtrack. Right. And I was 15 years old. And I remember they paid us. And at that time, $10 was a godsend to me. We're talking about 1969. And they paid us, and they gave us, I think I made $65, if I remember. And I had never had $65 in my hand that was mine at one time. And I remember looking at that and thinking about that. And that night was magic. They had, the sound was just great in there, and it was a big, huge sound. And we were playing these old songs. And I said, this is the environment that I want more of. Right. And when I got my driver's license, Harry gave me a job. Now, sometimes I had to sweep up. Sometimes I had to take the trash down to the dump. Sometimes I had to teach some kid how to play guitar. But every time they had a session, I was already in the building, and he would let me do recording sessions. And I said, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And I had to play live to accent it too, to make some money, but that's what I've done since. And I love it. Still do it. I travel usually 2 to 3 days a week. I've condensed my travel a little bit, but I still travel to the coast. I've got a studio down there that I work a couple times a month, and
it's giving you sounds like it's giving you an experiential lifestyle too.
But when they taught me how to play, when my folks shared their music with me, because that's where I got it from, they gave me a college education. I had no idea that's what it was. Right. But it was, I couldn't have bought it. I couldn't have bought it, and I didn't do anything to deserve it. It just, here it was. You can take it and you can run with it or not. Nobody forced me into it. Right. I did it because I wanted to. And I wanted to live here. I wanted to live in Wilkes. I went to Nashville in 74. Everybody said, this is where you need to go. You're cut out for this. I was 20 years old, and I took a little time and went out there. I didn't stay very long. And as a matter of fact, Harry helped me. He took me out there to the audio exhibition, and I spent some time with some players that I had met. The town's too big for me. I liked it here, and I wanted to be where my kinfolk were, where my friends and my family were. But I said, I think I can still make a living here. I think I can. And it got thin a few times, but there's always been work. Yeah. I've never been out of work.
It's good to be home.
Oh, boy. It's. I wish I could give that to the world. I wish I could give that sense of belonging to everybody I know. I think they would be less prone to fight with each other and scrap, and maybe be happy to have what they've got.
Yeah, you're a little kinder to each other if you sleep good at night.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, David, why don't you share a little bit of the sounds that you like to create?
Sure, let's see.
You've done real well. We made it, we're at a time of the year where a lot of people have got a little cough because of the seasonal
It's
things.
I get it every year.
But I think that's something that folk in this region completely relate to.
Yeah, it's part of it. And that's one of those things you have to, you still have to go play. Sometimes you might have to go play getting over the flu or COVID.
Right.
My bass player in our Dixie Dawn band. I was talking to him last night. He said, well, I just took my test. I've got COVID again. This is 3 times for him. He said, I guess it's getting to be a habit. I'll do a little bit of a song that the Lord gave me. It's really my testimony, and it's in the bluegrass realm. I wrote it to be a Southern gospel song for other people to sing, and nobody picked it up, so I did it. And then after I did it, I had a group pick it up, and they did real well with it. So, but I still sing it at a church every now and then. Once I had no peace within, sinking in that sea of sin. When the waves came on my boat, I thought I'd drown. Then the Savior came to me, cast a line into the sea, pulled me up, and now a better life I've found. And now I'm sailing with the Master, riding through the breakers tall. No more sinking I will fear when His commands fall on my ear, and through His gift of life I've gained it all. Oh, won't you listen to me, friend? He won't leave you in your sin if you'll let Him chart the course and steer the way. When Jesus stands behind the wheel, Satan's grip you'll cease to feel. Though the night be dark, you'll find a brighter day, and you'll be sailing with the Master, riding through the breakers tall. No more sinking you will fear when His commands fall on your ear, and through His gift of life you'll gain it all. And through His gift of life you'll gain it all. That's about the end of that.
That's great, David. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I can see your celebration of music and life joined together.
Well, I appreciate that. If I had to come back and no one understands totally what eternity is. I know where I want to be, who I want to be with, because we're promised in Scripture that we can be with our loved ones again. We can be with the Lord eternally. But if He said, Dave, I'm going to let you go back and do it again, what you going to do? I'd say, well, give me the same folks and same place to live, and give me the music, and I'll just do that again.
Yeah.
And I think I'd be happy with that. And who knows? That may be what eternity is. We're not really sure.
That's right. We're not. Well, David, we won't wait that long for our next visit.
Okay.
But we can go ahead and put it on the books, 45 years out?
That sounds good.
All right, but we'll do one before the year's over. That'll be good. Talk about the holidays.
There's a lot of folks here in Wilkes, and they've got their story. And I'll tell you, this is an amazing place.
Yeah.
I've never been anywhere I'd rather be.
Good to be home.
Good to be home.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for spending time with us on Life in Wilkes. We value you as a viewer and appreciate when you share the show with your friends and family. Be sure to bookmark our channel and join us again on the next episode of Life in Wilkes.